The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. Always glad. Inside the snow globe on my father's desk, there was a penguin wearing a red and white striped scarf. When I was little, my father would pull me to his lap and would reach for the snow globe. He would turn it over, letting all the snow collect on the top, then quickly invert it. The two of us watched the snow fall gently around the penguin. The penguin was alone in there. I thought and I worried for him. When I told my father this, he said, "Don't worry, Susie. He has a nice life. He's trapped in a perfect world." 1. My name was Salmon, like the fish. First name, Susie. I was 14 when I was murdered on December 6, 1973. In the newspapers, photos of missing girls from 17s, most looked like me. White girls with mousy brown hair. This was before kids of all races and genders started appearing on the milk cartons or the Daily Mail. It was still back when people believed things that didn't happen. In my junior year in high school, I quoted from a Spanish poet my sister had turned me onto, Juan Ramon Jimenez. It went like this: If they give you ruled paper, write the other way. I chose it because it expressed my contempt for my structure surroundings a classroom, not because of a dopey quote from a rock group. I thought it marked me as a literary. I was a member of the chess club and champ club and burned everything I tried to make in Mrs. Domenico's home ec class. My father's my favorite teacher was Mr. Botet, who taught biology and liked to animate the frogs and crawfish we had discovered by making them dance in their wax pants. I wasn't killed by Mr. Botet, by the way. Don't think every person you're going to meet here is a suspect. That's a problem. You never know. Mr. Botet came to my memorial, as may I add, did almost my entire junior high school. I was never so popular, and I cried quite a bit. He had a sick kid. We all knew this, so when we laughed at his old joke, which were rusty way before I had him, we laughed too, forcing us sometimes just to make him happy. His daughter died a year and a half later after I did. She had leukemia, but I never saw her in my heaven. My murderer was a man from our neighborhood. My mother liked his border flowers. My father talked to him once about fertilizer. My murderer believed in old-fashioned things, like eggshells and coffee grounds, which he said his own mother had used. My father came home smiling, making jokes about how the man's garden might be beautiful, but it would sink into the high heaven once a heat wave hit. But on December 6, 1973, it was snowing, and I took a shortcut from the cornfield back from junior high. It was dark out because the days were short in the winter, and I remember the broken corn stalks made my walk more difficult. The snow was falling lightly, like a flurry of small hands, and I was breathing through my nose until the running so much that I had to open my mouth. 6 feet where Mr. Harvey stood. I stuck my tongue out to taste the snowflake. "Don't let me startle you," Mr. Harvey said. Of course, in a cornfield in the dark, I was startled. After I was dead, I thought about how there had been in the light scent of cologne in the air, but I had not been paying attention or thought it was coming from one of the houses up ahead. "Mr. Harvey," I said, "you're the older Salmon girl, right?" "Yes." "How are your folks?" Although the eldest in my family and good in acing the science quiz, I had never felt comfortable with adults. "Fine," I said. I was cold, but the natural authority of his age, and the added fact that he was a neighbor and talked to my father about fertilizer rooted me to the spot. "I built something back here," he said. "Would you like to see?" "I'm sort of cold, Mr. Harvey," I said, "and my mom likes me home before dark." "It's after dark, Susie," he said. I wish now that I had known this was weird. I never told him my name. I guess I thought my father had told him one of the embarrassing anecdotes he saw merely as loving sentiments of his children. My father was the kind of dad who kept a nude photo of you when you were 3 in the downstairs bathroom, the one the guests would see. He did this to my little sister, Lindsay. Thank God. At least I was spared from that indignity. But he liked to tell stories about how once Lindsay was born. I was so jealous. That day while he was on the phone in the other room, I moved down to the couch. He could see me from where he stood and tried to be on top of Lindsay in her carrier. This story humiliated me every time he told it. The pastor of our church, to our neighborhood, Miss Deed, and who was therapist and whose take was he wanted to hear, and to everyone who ever said, Susie has a lot of spunk. Spunk, my father would say. Let me tell you about spunk, and he would launch immediately into the Susie peed out Lizzie story. But it turned out my father had not mentioned us to Mr. Harvey, or told him the Susie peed on Lindsay story. Mr. Harvey would later say these words to my mother when he ran into her street. I heard about the horrible, horrible tragedy. What was your daughter's name again? Susie, my mother said, racing under the weight of it, a weight of some naively hope that might lie in something someday, not knowing that it would only go further on her in a new very way for the rest of her life. Mr. Harvey told her the usual. I hope they get the bastard. I'm sorry for your loss. I was in heaven by that time, fitting my limbs together and could believe his audacity. The man has no shame, I said to Franny, my intake counselor. Exactly, she said. It made her point simply as that. There wasn't a lot of bullshit in my heaven. Mr. Harvey said it would only take a minute, so I followed him a little further to the cornfield, where fewer stalks were broken off because no one used the shortcut to junior high. My mom had told my baby brother, Buckley, that in the cornfield wasn't edible. When he asked why no one from the neighborhood ate it. The corn is for horses, not humans, she said. Not dogs? Buckley asked. No, Mother answered. Not dinosaurs? Buckley asked. And it went like that. I made a little hiding place, said Mr. Harvey. He stopped and turned to me. I don't see anything, I said. I was aware that Mr. Harvey was looking at me strangely. I had the older men look at me that way since I lost my baby fat. But they usually didn't lose their marbles over me when I was wearing a royal blue parka and yellow elephant belt bottoms. His glasses were small and round with gold frames, and his eyes looked out over them and at me. You should be more observant, Susie, he said. I felt like observing my way out of there, but I didn't. Why didn't I? Franny said these questions were fruitless. You didn't, and that's that. Don't mull over it. It does no good. You're dead, and you have to accept it. Try again, Mr. Harvey said, and he squatted down and knocked against the ground. What's that? I asked. My ears were freezing, and I wouldn't wear the multicolored cap with the pom-pom and jingle bells that my mother had asked me one Christmas. Had shoved it in the pocket of my parka instead. Remember that it went over the stalk of the ground near him. It felt hard in the frozen earth, which was pretty hard. It's wood, Mr. Harvey said. It keeps the entrance from the collapsing. Other than that, it's all made of earth. What is it? I asked. I was no longer cold or weirded out by the look he had given me. I was like I was in science class. I was curious. Come and see. It was awkward to get into. That much he admitted once we were both inside the hole, but I was so amazed at how he had made a chimney that could draw smoke out if he ever chose to build a fire, that the awkwardness of getting in and out of the hole wasn't on my mind. You could add that escape wasn't a concept any real experience with. The worst I had to escape was Artie, a strange-looking kid at school whose father was a mortician. He liked to pretend he was carrying a needle full of implant fluid around with him. On his notebooks, he would draw needle spilling dark drips. This is Needle, I said to Mr. Harvey. He could have been the hunchback of Notre Dame who would read about in French class. I didn't care. I completely reverted. I was with my brother Buckley in our day trip Museum of Natural History in New York, where he'd fallen in love with the huge skeletons on display. I hadn't used the word needle in public since elementary school. Like taking candy from a baby, Franny said. can still see the hole like it was yesterday. And it was. I was Presbyterial yesterday for us. It was the size of a small room, the mud room in our house. Say, where we keep our butts and slickers, and where Mom had managed to fit a washer and dryer, one on top of the other. I could almost stand up on it, but Mr. Harvey had to stoop. He created a bench alongside of the way he dug it out, and immediately sat down. Look around, he said. I stared in amazement. The dugout shelf above him where he placed matches of row batteries and battery-powered fluorescent lamp. Now the cast of the light of the room, its airy fluorescent lamp. Now the uh features were to see on top of me. There was a mirror on the shelf, and a razor and shaving cream. I thought that was odd. Wouldn't he do that at home? But I guess I feared a man who had perfectly good split level, then built an underground room only half a mile away had to be kind of Lulu too. My father had a nice way of scaring people like him. The man's a character. That's all. So I guess I was thinking that Mr. Harvey was a character, and I liked the room, and it was warm. Now I want to know how he built it, what mechanics the things were, and where he learned to do something like that. By the time the Gilbert's dog found my elbow 3 days later and brought it home with a telling corn husk attached to it, Mr. Harvey had closed it up. I was entranced during this. I didn't get to see him sweat it out, remove the wood reinforcement by getting evidence along my body parts, except that elbow. By the time I popped up with enough withdrawal to look at the going-ons on Earth, I was more concerned with my family than anything else. My mother sat on the hard chair at the front door with her mouth open, her pale face paler than I've ever seen, her blue eyes staring. My father was driven into motion. He wanted to know the details and to comb the cornfields along with the cops. I still thank God for the small detective named Lanfordman. He assigned 2 uniforms to take my dad into town and have him point out all the places I hung out with my friends. The uniforms kept my dad busy and wanted them all the whole first day. No one had told Lindsay, who was 13 and would have been old enough, or Buckley, who was 4 and would be honest and never fully understand. Mr. Harvey asked if he would like a refreshment. That's how he put it. And I said I had to go home. Be polite and have a Coke, he said. I'm sure the other kids would. What other kids? I'll put this for the kids in the neighborhood. I thought it would be some poor clubhouse. I don't think I believed this then. I thought he was lying, but I thought it was a pitiful lie. I imagined he was lonely. He had read about the men in health class, men who never married and ate frozen meals every night, who were afraid of rejection, that they didn't even own pets. I felt sorry for him. Okay, I said. I'll have a Coke. In a little while, he said, Aren't you warm, Susie? Why don't you take off your parka? I did. After this, he said, You're very pretty, Susie. Thanks, I said, even though he gave me what my friend Clarissa and I have doubted skivvies. Do you have a boyfriend? No, Mr. Harvey. I said. I swallowed the rest of my Coke, which was a lot, and said, I gotta go, Mr. Harvey. This is a cool place, but I have to go. He stood up and did his hunchback numberback sticks and dug in. Steps that would lead to the world. I don't know why you think you're leaving. I talked so that I wouldn't have to take and acknowledge Mr. Harvey was no character. He made me feel skippy and icky now that he was blocking the door. Mr. Harvey, I really have to go home. Take off your clothes. What? Take off your clothes. Mr. Harvey said. I want to check that you're still a virgin. I am, Mr. Harvey, I said. I want to make sure your parents will thank me. My parents? They only want good girls, he said. Mr. Harvey, I said, please let me leave. You aren't leaving, Susie. You're mine now. Fitness was not the big thing back then. Aerobics was barely a word. Girls were supposed to be soft. The only girls we suspected were a bunch could climb the ropes at school. I fought hard. I fought as hard as I could to not let Mr. Harvey hurt me. But my heart, hard as I could, was not hard enough. Not even close. I was soon lying down on the ground with him on top of me, panting and sweating, having lost his glasses in the struggles. I was so alive then. I thought it was the worst thing in the world to be laying flat on my back with a sweating man on top of me, to be trapped inside the earth and have no one know where I was. I thought of my mother. My mother would be checking the dial clock on her oven. It was a new oven she loved and had a clock in it. I can I can time things to the minute, she told to her own mother. A mother who couldn't care less about ovens. She would be worried, but more angry than worried. My lateness. If my father pulled into the garage, she would rush about fixing him a cocktail and try sharing and put an exasperated face. You know, junior high. She said, maybe it's sprinkling. Abigail, my father would say, how can it be sprinkling when it's snowing? Having failed with this, my mother might rush back into the room and say, play with your father, while she dug into the kitchen, took a nip of her sherry for herself. Mr. Harvey started to press his lips against mine. They were blubbery and wet. I wanted to scream, but I was too afraid and too exhausted from the fight. I had been kissed once by someone I liked. His name was Rain, and he was Indian. He had an accent and was dark. I wasn't supposed to like him. Clarissa called his large eyes with their half-closed eyelids freakadelic. But he was nice and smart. It helped me cheat on my algebra exam, while pretending he had it. He kissed me by my locker the day before we turned in our photos in the yearbook. When the yearbook came out at the end of the summer, I sat under his picture. He had, under, he had answered the standard. My heart belongs to, with Susie Salmon. I guess he had plans. I remember that his lips were chapped. Don't, Mr. Harvey. I managed and kept saying that one word a lot. Don't. And I said please a lot too. Fanny told me that almost everyone begged please before dying. I want you, Susie, he said. Please, I said. Don't. I said sometimes I combined them. Please don't. Or don't please. It was like insisting that a key works when it doesn't, or yelling, I've got it, I've got it, I've got it. Let a softball game go sailing over into standards. Please don't. But he grew tired of hearing me play. He reached into the pocket of my parka and balled up my hat my mother had made me, smashing it into my mouth. The only sound I made after that was the weak tingling bells. As he kissed his wet lips down my face and neck, and then began to shove his hands underneath my shirt. I wept. I began to leave my body, and I began to inhabit the air, the silence, and struggle so I would not feel. He ripped open my pants, not having found a visible zipper my mother had artfully sewn into their side. Big white, he said. I felt huge and bloated. I felt like a sea which he stood and pissed and shat. I felt the corners of my body were turning on themselves and out, like a cat's cradle, which I played with Lindsay just to make her happy. He started working himself over me. Susie, Susie, I heard my mother calling. Dinner's ready. He was inside me. He was grunting. We're having string beans and lamb. I was the mortar, and he was the pestle. Your brother has a new finger painting, and I made apple crumb cake. Mr. Harvey made me lie, still underneath him, and listen to the beating of his heart, and the beating of mine. How mine skipped like a rabbit, and how his thudded a hammer against cloth. We lay there with our bodies touching, and I shook. Powerful knowledge took hold. He had done this thing to me, and I had lived. That was all. I was still breathing. I heard his heart. I smelled his breath. The dark earth surrounding us smelled like what it was moist dirt, where worms and animals lived their daily lives, and I could have yelled for hours. I knew he was going to kill me. I did not realize that when I was an animal already dying. Why don't you get up, Mr. Harvey said as he rolled to the side and then crouched over me. His voice was gentle, encouraging, a lover's voice to a late morning, a suggestion, not a command. I could not move. I could not get up. When I would not, was it only that on was it only that of not following his suggestion? He leaned to the side and fell over his head across the ledge where his razor and shaving cream sat. He brought back a knife and sheathed it and smiled, covering up in a grin. He took the hat from her mouth. Tell me you love me, he said. Gently, I did. The end came anyway. 2. When I first entered heaven, I thought everyone saw what I saw. That in everyone's heaven there were soccer goalposts in the distance, lumbering women throwing shot put and javelin. That's all the buildings were like in suburban north and east schools built in 1960s. Large squat buildings spread out the dismally landscaped sandy lots, with overhangs and open space to make them feel modern. My favorite part was the colored blocks, where turquoise and orange was like the blocks in Fairlex High. Sometimes summer, I made my father drive me by Fairlex High just so I can imagine myself there. Following 7, 8, and 9 grades of middle school, high school would have been a fresh start. When I got to Fairlex High, I would insist on being called Suzanne. I would wear my hair feathered up in a feather or up in a bun. I would only have the boys wanted and the girls envied. But I would be nice on top of it all, that they would feel too guilty to do anything but worship me, and I could think of myself having reached a sort of queenly status as protecting misfit kids from the cafeteria. When someone taunted Clive Saunders for walking like a girl, I would deliver swift vengeance from my foot to the thunderness protect parts. When the boys teased Phoebe Hart for her sizable breast, I would give a speech on why boob jokes weren't funny. I had to forget that I had to make a list of the margins on my notebook when Phoebe walked by. Winnabows, hoo-haws, Johnny Yellows. At the end of my reveres, I sat back in the car with my father drove. I was beyond proud. I would overtake the high school in a matter of days, not years, when expecting an Oscar for Best Actress during my junior year. These were my dreams on earth. After a few days in heaven, I realized that javelin throwers and the shot putters of the boys who play basketball on the cracked blacktop were all in their own vision of heaven. Theirs just fit with mine. Didn't duplicate precisely, but had a lot of same things go inside. I met Holly, who became my roommate on the third day. She was sitting on the swing set. I didn't question that a high school had swing sets that were in heaven, and a flat bench swings that only bucket seats were made of hard black rubber that cradled you and you could bounce a bit before swinging. Holly sat reading a book in a weird alphabet associated with the pork fried rice my father brought home from Hot Fat Kitchen, a place Buckley loved but name of loved so much and yelled Hot Fat. At the top of things of lungs, now I know Vietnamese. And I know that Vietnamese is not what Herman Jade, who owned Hop Fat, was. And that Herman Jade was not Herman Jade's real name, but the ones he adopted when he came to the US from China. Holly taught me all this. Hi, I said. My name is Susie. Later she would tell me she picked her name from a movie on Breakfast at Tiffany's, but the day it rolled but that day it rolled off her tongue. I'm Holly, she said, because she wanted no trace of an accident in heaven. She had none. I stared at her black hair and it was shiny like the promising magazines. How long have you been here? I asked. 3 days. Me too. I sat down on the swing next to her and twisted my body around to tie up the change, and then I let it spin until I stopped. Do you like it here? She asked. No, me either. So I began. We had been given our heavens our simplest dream. There were no teachers in the school. We never had to go inside except for art class for me and jazz band for Holly. The boys did not pinch our backsides and tell us we smelled. Our textbooks were 17 in glamour and vogue, and our heavens expanded as our relationship grew. We wanted many of the same things. Franny, my intake counselor, became our guide. Franny was old enough to be our mother, mid-40s, and it took Holly and me for a while to figure out that it was been something we wanted, our mothers. In Franny's heaven, she served and rewarded by the results of gratitude. On Earth, she had been social worker in the homeless institute, She worked from a church named St. Mary that served meals to women and children only. She did everything there from manning the phones to swatting the roaches, karate chop style. She was shot by the face by a man looking for his wife. Franny walked over to Holly and me on the fifth day. She handed us two Dixie cups of lime Kool-Aid and we drank. I'm here to help, she said. I looked at her into small blue eyes surrounded by laugh lines and told her the truth. We're bored. Holly was busy trying to reach her tongue out far to see if it had turned green. What do you want? Franny asked. I don't know, I said. All you have to do is desire it, and if you desire it enough and understand why, really know, it will come. It seemed so simple, and it was. That how Holly and I got our duplex. I hated our split level of on Earth. I hated my parents' furniture and how our house looked into other houses and another house and another, and I echoed the sameness riding up that hill. Our duplex looked into the park, and in the distance, just close enough, no, we weren't alone. But not too close. We could see our lights on the other houses. Eventually, I began to desire more. What I found strange was how much I desired to know what I had not known on Earth. I wanted to allow to be grown up. People grow up by living, I said to Franny. I want to live. That's out, she said. Can we at least watch the living? I asked Ollie. You already do. I think she means whole lives, I said from beginning to end, to see how they did it, all their secrets that we can pretend better. You won't experience, said Franny, clarified. Thank you, Brain Central, I said, but our heavens began to grow. There was a high school still, and Fairlight Secretary, but there were no roads leading out. Walk the paths, Franny said, and you'll find what you need. So when Holly and I set out, our heaven had an ice cream shop where when you asked for mistake ice cream, no one ever said it's seasonal. It had a newspaper where our pictures appeared and lot made us look important. It had real men and beautiful women too, because Holly and I were devoted to fashion magazines. Sometimes Holly seemed to like she wasn't paying attention, and other times she was gone when I wasn't looking for her. That was when she went to a part of heaven we didn't share. I missed her then, but it was also missing because by then I knew the meaning of forever. I could not have what I wanted most, Mr. Harvey dead and me living. Heaven wasn't perfect, but I came to believe if I watched closely and desired, I might change the lives I lived on Earth. My father was the one who took the phone call on December 9th. It was the beginning of the end. He gave the police my blood type and had to describe the lightness of my skin. They asked him if I had identifying features. We described my face in detail, getting lost in it. Like that's good for him, let him go on. The next news, too horrible to interrupt, when he said, Mr. Salmon, we have found only a body part. My father stood in the kitchen. Sickening shiver took over him. Oh, he told that to Abigail. So you can't be certain that she's dead, he asked. Nothing is ever certain, Len Furman said. That was the line my father said to my mother. Nothing is ever certain. For 3 nights he hadn't known how to touch my mother or what to say. Before they never found themselves were broken together. Usually it was one needing the other, but not both needing each other. And so there had been a way by touching to borrow from the strongest one's strength, and that they had never understood as they now. What word horror meant. Nothing is ever certain, my mother said, clinging as she had hoped she might. My mother had been the one who knew the meaning of each charm on my bracelet, where we had gotten it and why I liked it. She made a meticulous list on why I carry it and worn. If found miles away and isolated along the road, these clues might lead a policeman linked to my dad. In my mind, I had wavered between bittersweet joy, seeing my mother's name, all the things I carried, loved, and her full title. Hope of these things mattered. That a stranger who found a cartoon character of erase or a rock or star button would report it to the police. After Len's phone call, my father reached out his hands. The two of them had sat in bed together, staring straight in front of them. My mother numbly clinging onto the list of things, my father feeling as if he were entering the dark tunnel. At some point, it began to rain. I could feel both of them thinking the same thing, but neither of them said it. that I was out there somewhere in the rain, that they hoped I was safe, that I was dry somewhere and warm. Neither of them knew who fell asleep first. Their bones ached for exhaustion. They drifted off and woke guiltily at the same time. The rain, which had changed several times as the temperature dropped, was now hail, and the sound of its small stones ice hitting the roof above woke them together. They did not speak. They looked at each other, and the small light cast from the lamp left across the room. My mother began to cry, and my father held her, wiped her tears and her pad of her thumbs, and she crested her cheekbones and kissed her forehead gently on the eyes, and looked away from them as they touched. I moved eyes into the cornfield, seeing that there was anything in the morning the police might find. The hail bent stalks and drove old animals into their holes, not so deep beneath the earth were the warrens and the wild rabbits. I loved the bunnies and ate the vegetables and flowers in the neighborhood nearby that sometimes unwittingly brought poison home to their dens. Then, inside the earth and so far away from the man or woman who laced the garden toxically, an entire family of rabbits would curl themselves and die. In the morning of the 10th, my father poured the scotch down the sink. Lindsay asked him why. I'm afraid I might drink it, he said. What was the phone call? My sister asked. What phone call? I heard you say things that you always say about Susie's Miles, about stars exploding. Did I say that? You kind of goofy. It was a cop, wasn't it? No lies? No lies, Lindsay agreed. They found a body part. It might be Susie's. It was a hard sock in the stomach. What? Nothing is ever certain, my father tried. Lindsay sat down at the kitchen table. I'm going to be sick, she said. Honey, Dad, I want you to tell me what it was, which body part, and then I'm going to need to throw up. My father got down the large metal mixing bowl. He brought it in the table and placed it near Lindsay before sitting down. Okay, she said. Tell me. It was an album. The Gilbert Stalks found it. He held her hand, and then she threw up, as she had promised, into the shiny silver bowl. Later that morning, the weather cleared, and not too far from the house, the police roped off the cornfield and began their search. The rain, sleet, snow, hail, melting mix had left the ground sodden. Still, there was an obvious area where the earth dug had been freshly manipulated. They had begun there and dug, and the places that left they found was dense concentration of my blood mixed with the dirt. By the time the police grew more and more frustrated, plying the cold wet ground and look for ground. And on the border of the soccer field, a few of my neighbors kept respectful distance from the police tape, wondering the met dress in heavy blue parkas, wielding shovels, rakes like medical tools. My mother and father remained at home. Nancy stayed in her room. Buckley was nearby his friend Nate's house, where he spent a lot of the time these days. They had told him it was Nick's son to sleep over at Clarissa's. I knew where my buddy was, but I could not tell them. I watched and waited to see what they would see, and then, like a thunderbolt late afternoon, policeman held up his earthquake fist and shouted. Over here, he said, and the other officers ran surrounding him. The neighbors had gone home, except Mrs. D. After conferring around the discovering police detectives, Berman broke their dark huddle and approached her. Mrs. Steed, he said over the tape separating them. Yes. You have a child in school? Yes. Could you come with me, please? The young officer led Miss Steed under police tape and over the bumpy turned cornfield, and the rest of the men stood. Miss Steed, does this look familiar? He held up a paperback copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Do they read this at school? Yes, she said, her face draining of color as all the small word. Do you mind if I ask you? He began. Ninth grade, she said, looking at Len from his slate blue eyes. Susie's grade. Jill, the therapist, and relied on her ability to hear bad news and relied on her ability to hear bad news and discuss rationally the difficult details of her patients' lives. But she found herself leaning into the young policeman who led over her. I could feel her wishing that she had gone home with other neighbors had left, wishing that she was in the living room with her husband or out in the backyard with her son. Who teaches that class? Mrs. DeWitt, Miss Dietzen. The kids find a real relief after Othello. Othello? Yes, she said, her knowledge of the school is suddenly very important right now. All the policemen listening. Mrs. DeWitt likes to module her reading list, and she does with big push right after their Christmas with Shakespeare. Then she passes out Harper Lee, the reward. If Susie was carrying around To Kill a Mockingbird, it means she must have turned into the paper on Othello already. All of this checked out. The police made calls and watched the circles widen. Mrs. DeWitt had my paper. Eventually, she sent it to my parents unmarked through the mail. Thought you would want to have this, Mrs. DeWitt had written, and a note attached to. I'm so very, very sorry. Lindsay inherited the paper because it was too painful for my mother to read. The unauthorized one man alone, I had called it. Lindsay had subjected the authorized, and I made up the other half. My sister punched 3 holes down the side of and fastened it, each carefully handwritten page into an empty notebook. Then put it in her closet underneath her Barbie case and had a box held over her perfect condition, Raggedy Ann and Andy and Reed. Detective Vernon called my parents. They had found a school book they believed that might have been given to me the last day. But if it could be anyone's, my father said to my mother as they began. Another reckless vigil. Or she could have dropped it along the way. Evidence was mounting, but they refused to believe. 2 days later, on December 12th, the police found my notes from Miss Boday's class. Animals had carried off the notebook from its original burial site. The dirt did not match the surrounding samples, but the graph paper in its scribbled theories that I could never understand but still identified recorded had been found in the cat knocked down crow's nest. Shreds of the paper were laced among the leaves and twigs. The police unbraided the graph paper along with strips and other kinds of paper thinner and the brittle had no lines. The girl who lived in that house where the tree stood recognized some of the handwriting was not my handwriting, but the writing of the boy who had a crush on me, Ray Singh. On his mother's special rice paper, Ray had written me a love note, which I had never read. He had tucked it into my notebook during the Wednesday lab. His hand was distinct. When the officers came, he had pieced together the scraps of my biology notebook and Ray Singh's love note. Ray is not feeling well, his mother said. When the detective called his house, they asked to speak to him, but they found out what they needed from her. Ray nodded as he repeated the policeman's questions to her son. Yes, he had written Susie Salmon a love note. Yes, he had put in her notebook after Miss Boyd had asked her to collect the pop quiz. Yes, he had called himself the Moor. What a sweet boy. Ray Singh became the first suspect. That sweet boy, my mother said. My father. Ray Singh is nice, my sister said in monotone at dinner that night. I watched my family and knew they knew that it was not Ray Singh. The police descended to his house and leaning heavily on him, insinuating things. They were fueled by the guilt and read into the Ray's dark skin, by the rage they felt to his manner, and by his beautiful yet too exotic and unbelievable mother. But Ray had an alibi. A whole host of nations could call him to testify on his behalf. His father, who taught post-colonial history at Penn, had urged his son to represent the teenage experience of the lecture he gave to International House on the day I died. At first, Ray's absence from school had been seen as evidence of his guilt. But once the police were presented with a list of 45 attendees who had seen Ray speak as Arabia, an American experience, they had to concede his innocence. The police stood outside Singh House and snapped small twigs from the hedges. It had been way easy, so magical, and as they were literally falling from the sky from the train. But rumors spread, and in school, what little headway Ray had made socially was reversed. He had began to go home immediately after school. All this made me go crazy. Watching but not able to steer the police towards the greenhouse so close to my parents, where Mr. Harvey sat carving finals for a gothic dollhouse he was building. He watched the news and scanned the papers. He wore his own innocence like a comfortable old coat. There had been a riot inside him. Now there was a calm. He tried to take solace in Holiday, our dog. I missed him in a way I hadn't yet let myself miss my mother, and my father, and my sister, and my brother. The way of missing would mean that I had accepted that I would never be with them again. And it began to sound so silly that I didn't believe it and would not believe it. Holiday stayed with Lindsay at night, stood by my father each time he answered the door to a new unknown, gladly partook of any nice eating the part of my mother. Let Buckley pull his tails and ears inside the house of locked doors. There was too much blood in the earth. On December 15, among the knocks of doors that signaled to my family that must have been themselves averted before opening their house to strangers, the kind but awkward neighbors and the bumbling but cruel reporters came one by one, made my father finally believe. It was Land Firemen, and had been so kind at him in uniform. They came inside by now familiar enough with the house to know that my mother preferred them to come in and say what they had to say in the living room, so that my sister and brother would not overhear. We found a personal item that we believed to be Susie's, Len said. Len was careful. I could see him calculating his words. He made sure to specify so that my parents would relieve of their first thoughts, that the police had found my body, that I was for certain dead. What? My mother said impatiently. She crossed her arms and braced for another inconsequential detail which others invested meaning. He was a wall. Notebooks and novels were nothing to her. Her daughter might survive without an arm. A lot of blood was a lot of blood, but it was not a body. And Chuck had said, and she believed, nothing like certain. But when they held her in evidence bag with my head inside, something broke in her. The fine wall leading the crystal had protected her heart, somehow tumbled into her disbelief shattered. The pom-pom, Lindsay said. She had crept into the living room from the kitchen. No one had ever seen her come in but me. My mother made a sound and reached out her hand. She made a metallic squeak as human as machine breaking down, uttering the last sounds before the whole engine locks. We tested the fibers, led son, and it appears whoever accosted Susie used this time. Was cried. What? My father asked. He was powerless and he was being told something he could not comprehend as a way to keep her quiet. What? It is covered with her saliva. The uniformed officer who had been silent until now volunteered. He gagged her with it. My mother grabbed from Lanferman's hand and the bells she had sewn into the pom-pom sounded as she landed on her knees. She had bent over the hat she made me. I saw Lizzie stiffen at the door. My parents were unrecognizable to her. Everything was unrecognizable. My father led that well-meaning Lanferman, the uniformed officers, to the front door. Mr. Solomon Lanferman said, "With the amount of blood we found and the violence I'm afraid it implies, as well as other material evidence we've discussed, we must work with the assumptions that your daughter has been killed." Alice overheard what she always knew, had known since 5 days before. My father told her about my elbow. My mother began to wail. We'll be working with this as a murder investigation from this point on. And Ferdinand said, "There's no body," my father tried. "All evidence points to your daughter's dead." "I'm very sorry." And the ununiformed officer had been staring to the right of my father's pleading eyes, and I wondered if that was something they taught him at school. But then Ferdinand met my father's gaze. "I'll call to check on you later today," he said. By the time my father turned back to the living room, he was too devastated to reach out to my mother sitting on the carpet, or my sister's hardened form nearby. I could not let them see him. He mounted to the stairs, thinking of Holiday on the rug in the study. I had last seen him there, into the deep ruff of fur surrounding the dog's neck. My father would let himself cry. Chapter. That afternoon, the three of them crept sowards in silence, as if the sound of footsteps might comfort the news. Nate's mother knocked on the door to return Buckley. No one answered. She stepped away, knowing something had changed inside the house, which looked exactly like the one on either side of it. She made herself my brother's coat, conspired to tell him that they would go out for ice cream and ruin his appetite. At 4, my mother and father ended up standing in the same room downstairs. They had come from the opposite doorways. My mother looked at my father. Mother, she said it. He nodded his head. He made the phone call, only to my only living grandparent, my mother's mother, Grandma Lynn. I worried that my sisters, left alone, would do something rash. She sat in her room on the old couch my parents had given up on and worked on hardening herself. Take deep breaths and hold them. Try to stay still for longer and longer periods of time. Make yourself small like stone. Curl the edges of yourself up and fold them on the where no one can see. My mother told her to. It was a choice whether she wanted to return to school before Christmas. There was only 1 week left, but Lindsay chose to go. On Monday in homeroom, everyone stared at her as she approached the front of the classroom. The principal would like to see you, dear. Mrs. DeWitt confided in hush. My sister did not look at Mrs. DeWitt, but she was speaking. She was perfecting the art, talking to someone while looking through them. The first clue something would have to give. Miss DeWitt was also an English teacher, but more importantly, she was married to Mr. DeWitt, who coached the boys' soccer and encouraged Lindsay to try out for his team. My sister liked the DeWitts, but the morning she began looking into the eyes of the only people she could fight against. As she gathered her things, she heard a whisper somewhere. She had certain that right before she left the room, Danny Clark had whispered something to Sylvia Hadley. Someone had dropped something near the back of the classroom. They did this. She believed so that way to pick up and back again. They could not hear a word or two in the but the dead girl's sister. Nancy walked through the hallway and in and out of the rows of the locker, dodging anyone who might be near. I wish I could walk with her. Mimic the principal in the way it always started the morning at the auditorium. Your principal is your pals with principals. I would whine in her ear, cracking her up. But while she was blessed with empty halls, she reached the main office. She was cursed with the dripping looks of counseling secretaries. No matter, she had prepared herself to be home in bedroom. She was armed by the teeth of onslaughting sympathy. Lindsay, suffocating, said, I received a call from your police office this morning. I'm so sorry to hear of your loss. She looked right at him. It was not so much look as a laser. What exactly is my loss? Mr. Kinney felt if he needed to address the issue of the children's crisis directly. He walked out from behind his desk and ushered Lindsay onto what had commonly referred to by the students, the sofa. Eventually, he would refer to the sofa with 2 chairs. When police and politics swept through the school district, told him it's not to have sofa there. Chairs are better. Sofas send the wrong message. Mr. Caden sat on the sofa and so did my sister. I like to think that she was a little thrilled in the moment, no matter how upset to be on the sofa itself. I like to think that I hadn't been robbed for everything. We're here to help you in any way we can, Mr. Caden said. He was doing his best. I'm fine, she said. Would you like to talk about it? What? Lindsay asked. She was being what my father called petulant. As in, Susie, don't speak to me in that petulant tone. You're lost, he said, and reached out to touch my sister's knee. His hand was like a brand burning into her. I wasn't aware I had lost anything, she said in her Herculean effort of maiden motions of patting her skirt and checking her pockets. Mr. Kitten didn't know what to say. He had the Vicky Kurtz fall apart in his arms a year before. It had been difficult, yes, but now in hindsight, Vicky Kurtz and her dead mother seemed an outwardly handled crisis. He had let Vicky Kurtz go onto the couch. No, no, Vicky. I've gone right over and sat down on it and had said, I'm sorry for your loss. Vicky Kurtz had burst out like an overinflated balloon. He held her in his arms as she sobbed and sobbed. At night, he brought us to the dry cleaners. But Lindsay Salmon was another thing altogether. She was gifted one of the 20 students from school who had been selected a star-wide gifted symposium. The only trouble in her file was a slight altercation early in the year when the teacher reprimanded her from being absent in literature, fear of flying into the classroom. Make her laugh, I wanted to say to him. Bring her to a Marx Brothers movie. Sit on a fart cushion. Show her the boxers you have on, with little devils eating the hot dogs on them. All I could do was talk. But no one on earth could hear me. And school's district made everyone else take tests, but then decided who was gifted and who was not. And I suggest Lindsay, that was so much more pissed off her hair than her Dumbo status. We won't have been born with masses of blonde hair, but mine quickly fell out and replaced the gurgling growth of muzzy brown. Nancy stayed and equated a short mythical place. She was the only true blonde in our family. But once called gifted had spurred her to love the name, she locked herself in her bedroom and read big books. When I read Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, and she read Camus, Resistance, Rebellion, and Death. She might not have been the god in most of it, but it carried around, and it made people, including teachers, begin to leave her alone. What I'm saying, Lindsay, is that we all miss Susie, Mr. Kinney said. She did not respond. She was very bright. He tried. She stared blankly at him. It's on your shoulders now. He had no idea what to say, but he thought the silence might mean that he was getting somewhere. You're the only Solomon girl now. Nothing. You know who came in to see me this morning, Mr. Caden? Had held back his big finish. The one sure would work. Mr. DeWitt. He's considering coaching a girls' team, Mr. Caden said. That they all center around you. He's watched how good you are, competitive as boys, and thinks other girls would come out he let you if you led the charge. What do you say? Inside my sister's heart, close like this, I'd say it would be pretty hard to play soccer in a soccer field when it's approximately 20 feet from my sister was supposedly murdered. Score. Mrs. Caden's mouth opened and he stared at her. Anything else? Lindsay asked. No. I. Mr. Caden reached his hand again. There was a thrill still, desire to understand. I want you to know how sorry we are, he said. I'm late for first period, she said. In that moment, she reminded me of the character in the Western my father loved. The ones who watched together in the late night TV, where there was always a man who, after shot was gone, raised the pistol on his lips and blew air across the opening. Lindsay got up and took it a walk, the principal cadence soft and slow. The walks were her only pastime. Secretaries were on the other side of the door. Teachers were at the front of the class and students in the very desk. Our parents at home, police coming by. She would not break. And watched her and felt the lines she repeated over and over again in her head. Fine. All of it is fine. I was dead, but something was happening all the time. People died. As she left the outer office that day, she appeared to be looking into the eyes of the secretaries, but she was focusing on their misapplied lipstick, where two piece paisley crepe in the chin instead. I hope that night she laid on the floor in her room, embraced her feet under the bureau. She did 10 sit-ups. She did 10 sets of sit-ups, and then she got into the push-up position. Another girl's kind Mr. Dewey had told her to begin the kind he had done in the race, heads up or one-handed clap in between. After she did 10 push-ups and went herself, she chose the two heaviest books, her dictionary and a word in a world I'm not gonna. She did bicep curls ached, until her arms ached. She focused only on her breathing, the in, the out. I sat in a gazebo in the main square of my heaven. Our neighbors of the race had a gazebo, and had grown up jealous of one. Watched my sister rage. Hours before I died, my mother hung the refrigerator of a picture that Buckley had drawn, and a drawing of thick blue lines separated the air ground in the days follow. Watched my family walk back and forth past the drawing. I became convinced that the thick blue line was a real place, and the in-between where heaven's horizons met earth, and I wanted to go there to be the cornflower blue Crayola, the royal, the turquoise. the sky. I often found myself desiring simple things, and I would get them. Riches in furry packages, dogs. Every day in my heaven, tiny dogs and big dogs, dogs of every kind, ran through the park outside my room. When I opened the door, I saw the fat and happy, skinny and hairy, lean and hairless even. Pit bulls rolled on their backs, and the nipples of the females distended in the dark, begging for their pups to come and suckle them, happy in the sun. Bassets tripped over their ears, ambling forward, nudging the rumps of the dachshunds, and the ankles of the greyhounds, and the heads of the picking sings. And when Holly took her tenor sax, set herself outside the door, and looked into the park and played the blues, all the hounds ran for her chorus. On their haunches they sat and wailing. Other doors opening then, women stepped out from where they lived alone with their roommates. I would step outside. Holly would go to the endless encore until the sun going down, and we would dance with the dogs, all of us together. We chased them, they chased us. We circled the tail to the tail. We were spotted gowns, flowered gowns, striped gowns, plain. And when the moon was high and the music would stop, the dancing stopped, and we froze. Mrs. Bethel Odemeyer, the oldest resident of my heaven, would bring out her violin. Molly trod lightly on her horn. They would do a duet. One woman old and silent, one woman not past girl yet. Back and forth, a crazy sonata, so less they create. All the dancers would slowly go inside. The song reverted until Holly, for a final time, passed the tune over to Miss Wedemeyer. Quiet, upright, the historical finish with a jig. The house asleep by then. This was my even song.